Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Luper, retired reporter. I covered election night for 35 straight years, and I didn't miss it one bit last night. It's great to see everyone here today. Now, today's Meet the Press forum provides a bookend to CMC's political season this fall, sponsored by Hannah News and the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. Please help me thank both for their support. Okay, now listen to this. It is the day after the election and the first day before the next election, so there's much to discuss. We're lucky today to have on our stage some of the folks whose job it is to get to the bottom of things and understand the details and ramifications of the what, where, or whom we voted for or not. Now we're going to get to our program. Allow me to introduce my esteemed friends and colleagues of the press. Political reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, Alan Johnson. Statehouse reporter for the Dayton Daily News, Laura Bischoff. Ohio Statehouse News Bureau reporter, Andy Chow. And our host and moderator today, anchor at NBC4 and host of The Spectrum, Colleen Marshall. Colleen, take it away.
All right, thank you all. Thanks, Carol, and good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the day after the election season, and as Carol said, get ready now for all the PAC ads because this is the season that they start running. We never really get away from it, but we can't complain about that up here because it's what we kind of live for. We love to cover elections, and this was one that I am frankly surprised at the outcome, and that's going to be my first topic of discussion. I'm not surprised that issue 3, the marijuana issue, went down. I am surprised that it went down so soundly, and as we were discussing earlier, and I'll start with you, Laura, because you and I already had this conversation, it went down in every county in the state.
Right, including Athens County. Hard to believe. And also, Mike Dawson, who a lot of you probably know, runs a website with elections data crunched every which way. And he called me before I came over today and told me that he got the data from the OSU precincts. And the issue 3 passed in the OSU precincts 51.07 to 48.9. That was a 172 vote difference. But the turnout was only 19.23%. which tells me that Buddy, the superhero mascot, marijuana mascot, did not make friends on the college campus.
But can't we kind of conclude from that as much as everyone said this is a young voters issue, if it passes, it's going to be the young voters. As much money as they spent on this campaign, Alan, maybe I'll go to you with this, they really didn't engage young people, did they? I drove around through campus to see how many signs they had up. I didn't see one.
Yeah, I don't think they really did engage young people. In fact, I don't think they engaged a lot of people. This was an issue that I've covered state government now for 30 years, and when I first saw this issue, I was just shocked. And I'm not casting a judgment on whether the issue was good or bad. I'm just saying it was so radically different than I'd ever seen or anticipated. And I think they had a sell job from the beginning, which they were unable to accomplish because of the structure of issue 3.
And what did you see about the structure? For one thing, the length of it was amazing. If you read the amendment itself was longer than the Constitution almost.
Well, when I personally voted, when I voted yesterday and I was on the voting machine and it was like 1 and 2 and then 3, next page, and I was going, boy, that really is long. I even know what's in it. So it was long, but I think the whole monopoly issue, and I know that Ian James and company would dispute it's a monopoly, but I don't think there's any doubt, at least for 4 years, it would have been a monopoly. And 10 investors who put in $25 million or so, I think that really threw people off. I think that was a stumbling block from the beginning.
And Andy, I know that you're about to comment on this, and you really are our representative of the younger generation today.
I'm actually 45, but no.
Me too.
I think it's. If you look at the polls and you look at people who are asked, are you for just personal use of marijuana? That leads by a majority, but a very small majority. So when you add all these other things to it, add the so-called monopoly issue to it, add the different tax structure to it, it's a hard sell no matter who you're trying to get to. And I think maybe Responsible Ohio is trying to depend on young voters to say, it's fine that you only have 10 growing sites. I want personal use and medical marijuana. And they, like you said, they really didn't get that turnout in the first place that you really needed to have a chance of this passing.
Well, the other thing is Alan touched on whether or not it was a monopoly. And I read through the language because Ian James, the campaign director for this, kept saying to me, it's not a monopoly in the fourth year, it's just regulated for 4 years and then it can expand. Well, the way it was written was, in the fourth year, they could add one grower, but they could only add that grower if the other 10 agreed to it and if they couldn't meet demand. So they were still in control of whether or not it would expand, and so of course that's a monopoly. It's the way we think of a monopoly. So it did spur the legislature, however, to rush issue 2 to the ballot. They haven't acted on medical marijuana for all these years that they've had proposals in front of them. They got issue 2 to the ballot very quickly. Do you think this issue and the fact that it might come back again was a wake-up call for lawmakers?
I'd say absolutely. The speaker said last night, and I suspect that he's saying it again at a brown bag lunch that's happening simultaneous to this, that they will be looking at a very narrowly tailored, carefully constructed medical marijuana proposal. Now they're going to talk about it. Doesn't mean they're actually going to act on it. You can always kick it to a study commission. But I do think that they're going to have to do something along those lines to then take the wind out of the sails of any future full-blown legalization proposal that might come forward in 2016 during a presidential race, or 2018 in the gubernatorial race.
It's funny you should mention that. I was just looking at a tweet here from my boss, Darrell Rowland, who says, Speaker Rosenberger says the legislature could commission a study itself on medical marijuana, so you speak it and it happens. That's very impressive, Laura.
Last night you had Attorney General Mike DeWine, Secretary of State John Husted, Democratic Representative Mike Curtin of the Columbus area. They were all saying, hey, it's time to really take a serious look at medical marijuana, which I can't imagine I would have predicted that 5 years ago, to have somebody like DeWine and Husted saying, yeah, let's take a serious look at medical marijuana. But I think this issue, with all of its problems, definitely forced everybody to take a good look at what people want when it comes to medical marijuana.
Well, the polls do show that as much as 90% of Ohioans favor medical marijuana, and it's hard to talk to someone who's loved someone who's gone through cancer and suffered through chronic pain sufferers, or the little girl in the ad, the epilepsy ad. Medical marijuana would have only been about 6% of the overall use of marijuana in the state had this passed. But boy, weren't they smart to emphasize that, because that's all anybody really cares about.
I think that they weren't smart enough to emphasize it. I think that they were all over the map with their messaging. They started out as Responsible Ohio, and then they said, no, we're yes on 3. Oh, wait, hang on a second. We're no on 2, yes on 3. Oh, by the way, we're not a monopoly. We're not a monopoly. We're not a monopoly.
And Nick Lachey.
And Nick Lachey, the boy band guy. They had like this second-tier Dancing with the Stars kind of celebs backing it. And I think that, and then they had
Drew Lachey was on Dancing with the Stars.
Drew Lachey.
Somebody told me that.
Montel's going to be very offended that you said that.
And then they also had, Buddy the mascot superhero, which caught all kinds of flack. And I think that they changed their message so many times. If they had started out, if they had crafted it differently and just gone for medical marijuana, I think we'd be having a completely different conversation. But even if they had stuck with the plan as written and only advertised on medical marijuana and just hammered that home and just ignored all the other issues, I think they might have had it. Well, they probably still would have failed, but not by 2-1.
Well, on that commercial, and I forget the young girl's name, was it Addison?
Addison.
Anyway, that was by far the best, and I'm talking production, commercial that they put out during the whole campaign. You would be really hard-pressed not to empathize with that family. But then, as Laura said, we went all over the ranch in terms of different kind of commercials and paid spokespeople and actresses and actors, and messages changed. And my track record covering campaigns is when a campaign switches around its message like that, it's in trouble.
And I heard somebody mention, like Laura said, they kept saying, we're not a monopoly, and you kept seeing ads like that. And somebody mentioned, well, when you're a voter and you're at the ballot and you see issue 2 that says this will stop monopolies, and the issue 3 will say this creates monopolies. I mean, if you're a voter who only sees those commercials, you're going to get confused. Wait, what did that commercial say? This is not a monopoly. Okay, yes on 2, no on 3. It got really confusing. And if they would have just stuck to one message, yeah, maybe it would have been a little tighter of a race.
And that's a good point. Not only was that a confusing message to everyone, the issues themselves were confusing, and people, because they were hearing about medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, a good friend of mine who works at another television station was telling me that yesterday, on Election Day, she had a conversation with her husband, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to vote. By the way, which one is the medical marijuana?" And she said, "I work in a newsroom. Do you not pay attention?" And what does this mean? That, all of these commercials that were going out and all of these stories that the television stations were doing about it, all of the newspapers covering it ad nauseum, and people were still confused. Don't you think each side has to do a better job of deciding how they promote messages in the future? It's confusing.
Well, Joel and I, along with Joe Ingles, were on a Facebook chat the other night on Channel 10, and it was amazing how many people were confused about issue 2 versus issue 3. I don't know if you would agree with that, but
Yes.
it just people kept asking over and over again, well, what does 2 do? What does 3 do? How do they relate? If I vote for 2, does this mark out 3? And we kept trying to patiently answer, but constant questions.
And you know what, at the end, about an hour into it, after we explained issue 2, after we explained issue 3, how they impact each other, people just started saying, okay, listen, how should I vote on this? or listen, I'm for marijuana and I'm okay if it's a monopoly. How do I vote on this? Right. Or I'm against monopolies, but not, and how should I vote on it? They just wanted it spelled out to them because there's just so much confusion.
But wouldn't you think, with all of the ads, again, what does this say about the campaign, the issue 3 proponents itself, that after all of that money, and they're admitting 25 million, and I was told 3 million in the last week of the campaign alone. But after all of that money, they couldn't hone in their message.
Well, like I said, I think that they were all over the map. That was their big problem, is that their campaign was very fractured, their messaging was scattered, and they ended up spending they raised more than 25 million according to the SEC filings, and they got 1.1 million votes. So that's like, $25 a vote. That's expensive.
Yeah.
I think when issue 2 came around as well, I think that must have threw them off their game a little bit too, because then they had to come up with a whole nother strategy, because they had to worry about if issue 2 passes and issue 3 passes, then they're still not out of the clearing. So I think when issue 2 came on the ballot as well, they had to kind of go back to the drawing board and say, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to make sure that not only do we get people to vote yes on issue 3, but also no on issue 2?
Well, now that people have voted yes on issue 2, and it passed not by as wide a margin, people were so confused about it. What does this mean going forward? And maybe I'll put this to you, Alan. I know you've written on this extensively. Now what happens? We've got issue 2 in place, but issue 2 does allow that if you get enough signatures and you have almost like a double issue on the ballot, if you want to bring some kind of a constitutional monopoly in front of voters again.
Well, I do think it's going to be a problem, with all due respect to my former publisher, Mike Curtin, who was the chief architect of issue 2. Issue 2 would say you have to have 2 votes on the same ballot if you want to have approval for an issue that would be a monopoly or a cartel or some special economic interest. Now, 2 questions arise. Who decides if it's a special economic interest? How is that defined? Frankly, it's up to the ballot board, which is 5 people, and so there is appeal rights, or would be appeal rights, to the Supreme Court, but I'm a little bit leery of how that could be applied in the future. How is it decided? What is, is a if you're seeking a tax, like the minimum wage increase, which is one of the issues that's been proposed, is that a special economic interest for low wage earners? I mean, I don't think so, but I think you could make that argument. I think it's going to be a problem that will be used by people in the future to try and curb access to the ballot.
And when something is written vaguely and broadly, there's always someone who will challenge it legally. There's always someone who will come forward and be willing to make a challenge. And do you each predict that that will happen?
Absolutely. I think that I think that already Ian James and his investors are trying to figure out if they could regroup for 2016 and how they could possibly get past issue 2.
There are also other groups out there that want to challenge it because there's already an issue out there where people think that there's not a clear definition of who has standing when they want to challenge a change to the Constitution. So there are groups out there that say, listen, we need to make sure that some citizen, some group can go out there and challenge this change to the Supreme Court if they don't like what they're seeing.
And you mentioned Nick Lachey, the boy band member. Nick Lachey is one of the big investors, one of the big investors in this movement. So those people today have to be taking a look at this campaign, what they already spent, and wondering, is it worth going back to Ohio, going back to the well again? We went down in 88 counties. We've got this confusing constitutional restriction now because of issue 2. Or do we start looking around at another state that might be more amenable to our plan to bring in medical marijuana? Do you think that a lot of those investors are scratching their heads today and maybe looking at Ian James and saying, that was a whole lot of money for the mess that we ended up with?
Yeah, I think that the national groups like the Marijuana Policy Project and the Drug Policy Alliance, they're already focused on other states, and they're pushing marijuana reform more, I would say, for ideological reasons than for financial reasons. I don't see how the Responsible Ohio Coalition of Investors will actually hold together. There might be a few of them that decide to double down on it and try and figure out a way to bring it back in 16. I think that it would have had a lot better chance had they just waited until 16 and done it in a presidential year when the turnout is much higher and when young voters are more excited. All the other recreational marijuana ballot issues across the nation in Alaska, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, and I think even DC, they all passed in even years.
I've heard from people that one of the reasons they didn't do that, and I don't know if this is true, it's speculative, but it's because television stations have a lot of commercial time bought up by the national campaigns and the PACs during a presidential election year, and quite frankly, our rates go up when you've got a presidential election year. Here, I think they thought they could corner the market.
Yeah, and in an odd-numbered election year, $25 million gets you a lot more than it does in an even-number election year, and so you saw it. Probably every day you saw a yes on issue 3 ad constantly, and it probably would be a lot harder. It wouldn't be as much campaigning or as much advertising in an even-numbered election year.
I agree. I don't think we're going to see issue 3 come back, certainly not in that form, maybe not at all, due respect to Ian James, but if I'd plunked down $25 million and I was asked to start funding it again, I would be hard pressed to say, yeah, sure, here's my wallet, let's go for it. I just think that was, I'm not faulting their campaign one way or the other. I just think it's a very hard sell. I was getting a lot of emails today and last night saying this was not a rejection of marijuana in Ohio. Well, it was certainly a rejection of that proposal of marijuana in Ohio. We can't really say if Ohioans favor marijuana were it under another premise, which is something still to be decided and which I think these other groups might be going for. But next year, I find unlikely as a campaign.
And that's something that's interesting. I think if you would have asked people 10 years ago what the fight over legalizing marijuana would be like, they would say, well, it would be, should this harmful drug be legalized in Ohio, or should we protect the people of Ohio? And now it wasn't really, should we legalize this drug or not? It was, should we do it this way or not? So I think we have come a long way from maybe 10 years ago. And all the people I talked to, anybody who said that they were going to vote against issue 3, they didn't say that it was because they thought marijuana was harmful or they were worried about some sort of drug epidemic if marijuana was legalized. They were just worried about the business structure. They were worried about this so-called monopoly that would have been implanted in Ohio.
And 1,100 dispensaries planned for it as well. You know, we should move on to another topic, and I know you don't cover City Hall as much, Laura, but I'm going to make you talk about this anyway, because we have a new mayor coming into the city of Columbus for the first time in 16 years. That was another race that a lot of people were predicting was going to be much closer than it ended up being. Zach Scott pulled some money out at the end. He had much more airtime than people predicted, especially given the primary when it was so lopsided and Andy Ginther was so far ahead. And then some problems emerged for Andy Ginther when it looked like there was a corruption scandal that might affect him. And some people were wondering what's going to happen at City Hall. Alan, I know you've also written extensively on this, so I'm going to start with you. Were you surprised at how large the margin of victory was for Andy Ginther last night?
Not really. Again, drawing on way too long covering political campaigns, kind of like Carol, who said she'd been covering them for a number of years. I have too, and I'm just, doesn't always happen, but when the party establishment is behind a candidate, they have forces that are very, very hard to beat. They have a get out the vote drive, they have a slate card, they have volunteers, and I think that really plays into this. When you've got another candidate who is of the same party, but maybe isn't the insider, so to speak, they have a real uphill way, and so I was not surprised at that, despite the potential for corruption that Andy Ginther has faced. Apparently the voters were not concerned that was going to be an issue and voted for him.
Were either of you surprised? I know, Laura, you don't cover it extensively, but was this what you expected?
Yeah, I think that, like what Alan said, because the party seemed to be more behind Ginther than Scott, that wasn't very surprising. Also, I mean, Ginther's got a lot of experience in Columbus city politics, and I think that helped him out a lot. So.
As much as money didn't help issue 3, I feel like money in this kind of mayoral race, when it just comes down to a candidate, I think it helped Ginther out a lot. And again, that's a name that you see out there, you see it on yard signs, and people go to the polls and they say, okay, Ginther, yeah, I've seen that name, I've heard about him, I've elected him to city council before, I'm gonna click that name again. And so I actually wasn't that surprised that it was that big of a blowout, because it's when it comes to city politics, it just kind of seems to be that way. And like Alan said, that there's that party establishment of the party.
And it doesn't hurt when you have, correct me if I'm wrong, 4-term mayor supporting you arm in arm at campaigns and events and so forth. Never underestimate the power of an influential incumbent to bring somebody along with them into office, even if they're not on the ballot. And Mayor Coleman did that with Ginther. I think his support was quite significant in this campaign.
Well, you know, Andy Ginther is 40 years old. He is a young man coming into this office, and he has the potential to maybe go on and be a multi-term mayor. And we saw all the Democrats, a Democratic sweep for city council last night. Everyone that they wanted to win won, including, a first-time person on the ballot, Liz Brown, daughter of Sherrod Brown. He was out campaigning for her yesterday here in Columbus. And so there really is, in this city, kind of a Democratic stronghold on City Hall. Is it something that is almost impossible to break at this point?
Well, I don't know if it's impossible to break. Obviously, we had a string of Republican mayors with Buck Reinhardt and Greg Lashutka, and certainly not impossible. City Council is another story, and I did cover City Council a very long time ago, and it was Democratic then, and it's been Democratic, and it pretty much will stay Democratic in my opinion. The mayor's race, I think, has more potential of shifting if you have another Republican who would be, more charismatic perhaps and would be a good candidate. So I don't think it's impossible for a Republican to be elected mayor in the city. The council, I think, is pretty much solidly Democrat for the foreseeable future.
I heard somebody say the only way a Republican can be elected to city council is if he was a former Buckeye player. And
that didn't happen.
And that didn't happen either. So I mean, if a former Buckeye doesn't get on, I don't know how you do it.
But he was in 5th place, so
Yeah,
he was
close.
right. He was the top non-winner, I guess. He led the losers column.
That's a new category, the top non-winner in today's
Yeah, the
election.
top non-winner tonight. You know, we also should talk about what Zach Scott said last night immediately after he conceded defeat. He said he will never run for mayor again. He'll be running for sheriff. He wants to be your sheriff, and he's not going to run for mayor again. Clearly, he is, talk about the campaign begins, he is campaigning already to hold on to the job that he's got right now. Insiders within the Democratic Party who were very angry at Zach Scott about some of the things he was said and the way the campaign unfolded have told me that he will likely be primaried and that they will find someone to go after him in the sheriff's race. I'm curious if any of you have heard the same thing and if you expect that to happen, that the Democratic Party itself will go after one of their party office holders.
I have not heard that specifically, but without using the politically incorrect word, payback is a you-know-what, and when you've run against a endorsed Democrat and angered your own party by doing so and maybe cut off some of the support you've had, I would not at all be surprised to see Zach Scott punished, if you will, by being primaried. I would not be surprised in that at all.
Me neither.
And what does this say about the whole, not just the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party? You know, a lot of Republicans have said maybe we need a ward system in the city of Columbus so that we don't have so much control by one party and so much, it's, you know, and now I'm sure they feel that they're even more empowered to make all of the decisions. Is that problematic, do you think?
I think a ward system is long overdue for the city, and again, I have been out of covering city politics directly for several years, covering state now, but I'm always surprised because people say, well, why do we have two Democrats running for mayor, or why do we have a disproportionate number of Democrats on city council? And well, when you have a system the way it's set up, it encourages that, I guess. And I think it would be a good idea to go to a ward system. But that's just my thought.
I used to cover City Hall in Flint, Michigan, and they had a ward system there, and it didn't solve any problems, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, people point to Cleveland and say it's chaotic up there, and they do have a ward system, and that it leads to maybe the backroom dealing kind of thing. So obviously, that's going to be up to the voters if they decide to do that. Let's talk also about Issue 1. Issue 1 was really not actively opposed by anyone. It's going to change the way we redraw districts, and some people have said it is long overdue for that because we have right now the extremes of each party having weight in the districts where they control the district. Was this a good thing for the state, do you think?
I think it remains to be seen. I think that the current system does not work very well. It doesn't serve the voters. You end up with, as you said, candidates who run to the extremes of their party and serve their very gerrymandered districts. Now, this new system is supposed to be set up to be more bipartisan, and they're supposed to draw districts that are more compact and do so in a more open and transparent manner. It's still politics, so call me a cynic, but you know, I'm going to see how it plays out.
Yeah, Mike Dawson, the man we mentioned earlier who specializes in how votes break down district by district, county by county, he was trying to lay out, there's a whole provision in the amendment that says make these districts fair, try to make these districts fair. But how do you do that if a lot of the Democrats are just compact into certain counties, and then you have giant rural areas that are mainly Republican? How do you carve that in a way that can be fair? So it's going to be interesting to see how they do that, how they're able to bend one way or another, and again, if they actually do try to go about it in a bipartisan way.
But you know, the last time they redrew the districts, Steve Stivers, as an example, ended up with a district that looks like an inverted C, and it snakes through 13 counties. And when he saw the boundaries of the new district that they were kind of putting him into to guarantee a Republican win, he said to me, there are cities in this district that I have never been in. and I'm suddenly going to be representing them. And he had to spend a whole lot of time on the road trying to introduce himself to people who lived hours away from him because of this gerrymandering. So isn't this something that is really long overdue?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They've been talking about this for like the 14, 15 years that I've been covering state politics. Now, keep in mind that issue 1 rather, only applies to drawing of legislative districts, not to the congressional districts. There's still kind of a secondary push to have a similar overhaul of that system. And it's, Ohio is a purple state, and yet the Republicans control just about everything. There's only 2 statewide elected Democrats, Bill O'Neill on the Ohio Supreme Court and Sherrod Brown. Otherwise, the Republicans have it all.
And not only do they have control over everything, but if you look at the numbers in just the House, Republicans have a record number of members in the House of Representatives, and that's not really indicative of what you would think to be a purple state. So the next maps are drawn in 2021, and I think both Republicans and Democrats saw an opportunity to say, listen, we don't know who's going to be in control in 2021. We don't know who's going to have the majority when we're writing these maps. So let's both come to an agreement on how we think this can be fair and how we can make sure that communities are better represented and that elections aren't just decided in the primaries and then nobody shows up to the general elections.
I want to remind everybody that we will be taking questions from the audience in just a few minutes, but before we do that, I want each one of you to kind of go down the line. Tell me, as we're looking forward to a new election year, what we should be keeping our eyes on in 2016. Now that Ohio, once again, this bellwether state, will be back in the spotlight again, and our governor still struggling, but trying to run for this national office. What are you going to be looking for and reporting on in the coming weeks? Alan?
Well, fortunately, most of those duties are handled by my boss, Darrell Rowland. But that said, and he's covering extensively, John Kasich, he's out campaigning. I guess if I had to make a guess, I would look for John Kasich to join a ticket as a vice presidential candidate. I don't have any idea who, although there's some speculation maybe Rubio, Kasich would be an interesting combination. I just, with all due respect to the governor, I just don't think he's going to have the firepower to take on some of the other national campaigns. And I think at this point, his numbers at best are stagnant and maybe slipping a little bit, and I think he has a problem there. But I think he might have a role in a vice presidential position, and that would bring a great strength to a national ticket, having Ohio's governor on a ticket like that.
Especially with the convention coming to Cleveland.
Exactly.
And Laura?
I think that the U.S. Senate race is going to be very interesting to follow. Of course, Cincinnati City Councilman P.G. Sittenfeld is challenging Ted Strickland. I think Strickland will beat him easily. And then it's Strickland against incumbent Rob Portman. Already we're seeing huge PAC money coming in from Americans for Prosperity and some others that are backing Portman in TV ads. And then I know that American Bridge, which is a liberal-leaning PAC, has been doing a lot of opposition research that they've been pushing out to media to say Portman, to shine a light on Portman's shortcomings. And this is going to be, the fight over the control of the Senate. It'll come through Ohio. It'll draw national attention and really big money.
Well, with those two races being said, I guess some other things to look at. I've been following the severance tax hike proposal for a while, and will legislators come to some sort of an agreement on increasing the tax that's imposed on oil and gas drillers? That might be something to look forward to as far as what's going on at the State House. Then, like was mentioned earlier, this minimum wage hike that has been approved to collect more signatures. And there's a term limits initiative out there to try to even strengthen term limits even more. And I think it limits a legislator of only serving in the State House for 12 years, no matter what chamber you're in. If you switch to another chamber, 12 years, that's it, don't come back.
And for what it's worth, there are 2 approved marijuana issues that are out there. they're approved to collect signatures. I don't know whether either or both or neither of them will make the ballot, but there are two that have been approved to collect signatures. They're different. They don't have a monopoly aspect. But, you know, hearkening back to what we said earlier, there are a couple out there that might potentially move forward.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's going to be interesting to see how those go because as we've heard a lot through this past election cycle, it takes millions of dollars to get something on the ballot now. So as much as people want to legalize pot, and there are a lot of grassroots efforts out there, you need millions of dollars in order to collect the signatures to get on the ballot.
And it's startling, isn't it, how often they collect these signatures and thousands of them have to be tossed out. You would think at this point with these professional collectors that they would have this worked out a little better.
Right, I mean, they have to get 306,000 valid signatures, which means usually you have to get 2.5 times that at least to be able to clear that 306.
And Alan, I just want to ask you briefly, I think we discussed that there are some court challenges to the issue 3 proponents that might come back on them on the way that they collected the signatures the last time around. Should we be worried about, not us worried about it, but how at this point, now that the issue has gone down, will the state even bother to pursue those?
I think Secretary of State John Husted will continue to pursue those. He was challenging Ian James and the responsible Ohio people on how they collected signatures, and I believe it was because some of the signatures they collected on registrations accompanying the petition may have been fraudulent. That was the claim anyway. Ian James responds that if we get a voter registration and it's from Mickey D. Mouse, we're required by law to turn it in. Doesn't mean we necessarily believe that Mickey D. Mouse is an actual voter, but we're required. We don't have the leisure to say, nope, throwing that one out. So, yes, I think Secretary Husted has, well, let's see, he has some incentive because he was called a lot of names by Ian James. He was called a bully, among other things, and I think that he will pursue that legal challenge against Responsible Ohio.
Also, I think that given that John Husted is interested in running for governor, to kind of pursue this, I don't know if it positions him, but it's definitely a strong move.
Yeah, and it keeps him in the news without having to pay for it.
Right. Also, I was going to add, 2016 at Dayton Daily, we're going to be keeping a close eye on the race to replace John Boehner in Congress. That's going to be a big fight. There's like I think 5 or 6, maybe 7 candidates all running for the special, and then also for the regular term. So it'll be kind of like a issues 2 and 3 confusion fest, where we have to repeat over and over again, like this is what's going on, this is when the vote is, this is who's getting selected, etc.
Well, here's a question for you, because I don't know the answer. Is there an election to replace him for a short time and then a permanent one, or is it just one?
It's 2. Actually, it's 4. Because
okay, which is it? Come on.
On March 15th, there'll be the primary for the special replace John Boehner for the remainder of his term,
okay,
and also the primary for a full term. And then June 7th, there's going to be the regular for the remainder of John Boehner's term, and then in November, it'll be the selection of the new congressman for the full term.
What could go wrong with that?
Right?
Like I said, a confusion fest.
Yeah, we're up here, what? They're doing what? Well, we'd love to take some questions from the audience if you have any about anything we've talked about today or anything else. Cabot's retirement, whatever you want to throw out there.
Hi, I'm Carol Newcomb. I'm wondering if the CBC special on heroin had any effect on issue 3, where they called Ohio the hotbed of heroin.
Well, I'm sorry, what special was that you're referring to?
Oh, the 60 Minutes.
CBS.
The 60
yes.
Minutes?
Yeah.
And it was on CBS too.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think we've known for a very long time, and I've written about it, and everybody up here has written about it or broadcast it, that Ohio is a hotbed of heroin use and pill use. I don't think, especially coming at that late minute, it really had much effect on the marijuana issue. Maybe in general, but not that particular broadcast.
I will say this, though, when it comes to national entities, national publications, and issue 3, I had so many friends who had no idea what issue 3 was, and then in the past week we saw something from Rolling Stone, New York Times, BuzzFeed, every single one of those bigger publications, Huffington Post, and those are the articles that everybody I saw on Facebook reading. Like I would share my stories that I guess nobody wants to listen to, but then all of a sudden, like, oh, I get it now. Rolling Stone just explained it really well. I was like, okay, great, thanks, guys. So I will say that I think that played a big role. Maybe it didn't get the win, but I think it kind of bumped it up a couple of points at least as far as people really understanding the issue.
You know, I forgot to make my statement, and Andy will be mad at me if I don't say, to please state your name when you ask your question, and we thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments. So you can go ahead.
Yeah, that takes me out of the loop right here. If I can do editorial comments. My name is John McKnight. Was the timing, in your investigative journalist's opinion, of the red light scandal with Ginther purely coincidental, or were there some political opponents or somebody else behind it that was trying to use the timing of that?
I think it was coincidental. I don't know what you've heard. I just think that federal investigators kind of move at their own pace. And if they really were trying to, in my opinion, if they were trying to do this one way or the other for the election, they would have probably had it even closer to the election. I just think that, trying to get any information out of the U.S. Attorney's Office is really, really like pulling teeth. They play everything close to the vest, and they just do it when they're ready to do it. And I can't imagine that in my opinion anyway, that, I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think about that? I think it was coincidental.
Same, yeah.
I think Colleen's right.
You're a smart person, Laura.
Well,
Alan?
I hate to go along with the crowd, but I think she's right too. I do think that anytime you have an issue like that, though, the political opposition immediately leaps on it to make it political, even if the timing is coincidental or unintended. And I don't think that issue is over yet. I may be wrong. I'm not the lead reporter on it. But I don't think Andy Ginther is out of the woods yet.
And I think a lot of people thought that John Rayfield fell very hard on his sword in that case. And so a lot of people, there's still that undercurrent of, oh, yeah, nobody at City Hall knew about it. There's kind of, it's just seemed hinky to a lot of people. And I agree with Alan. We just all agree with each other, but I agree that this probably isn't completely over yet.
Well, I know John was actually a city council aide a million years ago when I covered City Hall. He was an aide to the late John Maloney, who was a city councilman, and he stayed on for a long time after that. And he is a very loyal political person. And as you said, he fell on his sword. And anytime someone falls on their sword, there's a lot of pain involved. And I'm not so sure that you can stay on your sword for very long without bringing somebody else along in your pain.
One additional question, if I may, a different topic. So Ginther and Coleman seem to be very similar in their thoughts right now. What changes do you expect we might see with Ginther when he takes office? Thank you.
Colleen, I think you have to field that one because I don't know anything about that.
Well, I do cover this quite a bit. I think that one thing, I think they have the same general philosophies about downtown development, about neighborhood investment. They really do. And I think it's the reason that Mayor Coleman backed Andy Ginther so much is that they are pretty much in agreement about the vision for the city and in thinking that they have taken the city a long way in the past 10 to 20 years. The city has evolved and grown. And I mean, look at the Short North, look at the Arena District, that they think that they've had some great successes that they want to capitalize on. I don't think that Andy Ginther is quite as charismatic as Mike Coleman is, but I think he's got his heart in the right place. That's just a personal opinion, just from dealing with them over the years. And I think that what they're hoping to do is to keep Columbus on this forward trajectory. We've got a low unemployment rate. We are a growth city. We are getting national attention. We really were on the short list for that national political convention. So I think they're pointing to a lot of positives. And I think the fact that he won by such a resounding margin means that people are saying, yeah, we want this to continue. So I think we're going to see a lot of the same in the next, at least in this first Ginther administration. That's totally a personal opinion. So.
Yes, I'm Kermit Whitfield. To bring this out more to a statewide level, I'm wondering, are there any ramifications from this election at all on some of the big things that you may think are coming up in 2016? And specifically, there's been a lot of coverage of energy, the power purchase agreement, the fact that there's a freeze on renewable energy and the like. That seems to be a big story, but it didn't seem to factor at all in this election, although I don't know if across the state there were people who were elected that might swing one way or the other. Could you speak to that and the prospects for 2016?
The PPAs are going to be a big deal in the next coming months, and I think right now it's going to be a big PUCO issue. So the PUCO is dealing with it right now, and then as far as what happens after that, it remains to be seen. As far as green energy standards and everything along those lines, there is one issue out there that was just certified to collect petition signatures. It's called the Green Energy Commission Initiative, something like that. But it's been around, it comes back every single year and it never goes anywhere. And if for some reason that does go the next step further, it'll be interesting to see what happens to it, because I think a lot of people could say that that could be called a monopoly. It requires that the state gives $65 million a year to this energy commission based in Delaware, the state of Delaware. And like I said, it hasn't gotten anywhere, so we don't know if it's going to move any further. But if it does, I think that might be the first victim or first test. Thank you of issue 2.
Or a victim, maybe.
Yeah.
I do agree that one could be the guinea pig for, or the canary in the coal mine, pick whichever you want, on that issue, because, as Joel said, it sets up that situation where you have a commission that is pretty much autonomous. They don't even have to pay attention to the legislature in terms of doing anything with these energy initiatives. So, you could call that whatever you want, but that one certainly seems ripe for that possibility of falling under issue 2.
And it was interesting, I thought, when Donald Trump called John Kasich out on fracking, if you saw in the most recent debate, and made a big show of the fact, well, Ohio's economy is turning around because of fracking, when that's really only about 2% of the new jobs. But all of that talk about fracking, if John Kasich does move up and become part of the ticket, here he is in control of Ohio, and he hasn't been able to get the severance tax through that Andy touched on. So I think that's going to be an interesting topic next year as well. And Jane?
I'm Jane Scott, and thank you all. I know you had a busy day yesterday and late last night, so we appreciate you being here today. You led right into my question. All the silliness and all of the drama and theater that we've been seeing in the GOP debate. I'm interested in your comments. What would you do differently, and how do you handle a panel of 10, 9 or 10 leaders when you've got such renegades in there? What would you have done differently? And just kind of your take on the last debate and whether the media deserved the whipping that they got.
Go ahead and start with that one, Laura.
I did not watch the most recent debate. I was helping my kid with his college applications. But in this coverage of it, it seems like I thought that the questions from the Fox moderators were really tough up in Cleveland. And so I don't know what CNBC did differently, other than I think it just kind of got unwieldy and distracting. And I think that there's some legitimate criticism of how the debates have been moderated in terms of prompting the candidates to attack one another and respond to each other. I think that gets old pretty quick. It makes good TV, I suppose, but however, I think that the risk for the GOP is that they're going to look like a bunch of whiny babies complaining about the debate rules. And you want to be president of the United States, and you can't manage a tough question from a guy from CNBC. I mean, I think they open themselves to criticism, I think.
And we've already seen Governor Kasich was one of the few people that didn't jump on the bandwagon to criticize CNBC, at least at first. I have so many, I could talk about this for a long time because I've watched all three of them and they just drive me crazy. Because first of all, you're right, Fox asked the hardest questions out of all of them.
I thought so too.
CNN kept saying, hey, this person said something awful about you. Hey, can you care to respond? And then this person just said something awful about, CNN seemed way more contentious than what CNBC did. And the only thing that I think CNBC did wrong was just turn off their mics. Just at a certain time, if they keep talking, just click their mic off. I don't understand why. I think they just kind of lost control of the situation where people just kind of kept talking and say, I have 15 more seconds, let me keep going. But other than that, I didn't think that the questions were more out of line than anything we saw in the previous two debates.
I agree that they're trying to get each other to attack each other, but I also think that it's very problematic when you allow the candidates and one or two specific candidates, Donald Trump, to decide what the debate rules should be. And when you turn over control of the debate and the questions and the format and the location, or I'm not going to show up. Okay, don't show up. And until the networks are willing to say, okay, we don't need you here. This is going to continue because they've turned it over. Oops, I'm sorry. They've turned over control. You know, it's like the monkeys are in charge of the cage.
I don't have any comment on that. I just want to apologize to Andy for calling him Joel. It's force of habit from working with Channel 10. I apologize.
My dad's name is Joel, and he's in the business. So,
I almost called you Joel, too. I also worked with Joel.
You know, my official name, my first name is actually Joel, so nobody's wrong here.
Okay.
So.
I take that back then.
Hey, Andy Campbell, one more question real quick. Democratic primary for U.S. Senator. It seems like Strickland's already assuming he's won. What about P.J. Sittenfeld? Is it a race? Should it be a race? How could it be a race?
Go ahead.
I can't imagine, again, going back to my comment earlier about the force of a party candidate, former governor and congressman. Strickland wins. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Primary is the American way. It's the political way. It's the party way, and I agree that we should have it, but I don't think there's any way Sittenfeld wins.
And one thing I will say that I found to be surprising about that is that so many people within the party, and we've talked a lot today about the party structure and the control, they said to him, it's not time for you to do this. Don't challenge Ted Strickland, because the only way you can go after Ted Strickland is to criticize Ted Strickland. And he's really kind of the father of the Democratic Party in the state of Ohio right now. And a lot of people owe a lot to Ted Strickland because he brings you up on the stage with him when you're running for office. He is supportive of you. He shares his campaign dollars. There are people in the State House, Democrats in the State House, there's no way they would work for someone other than Ted Strickland. So I think that it wasn't time for P.J. Sittenfeld, and I think that's going to show in the primary in the numbers next year.
I think it's too bad because PG, so far from what I've seen, is very energetic, very smart. He seems like he knows what he's doing. And if we could have had some type of open, competitive primary where the voters really got to see both people and nobody really stand behind either of them and let the voters make a decision, it'd be interesting to see what they would have done.
Yeah, and I also think that the Democratic Party really needs to build its farm team, and you know, the fact that they weren't able to convince PG to maybe go for a different office is it's a sign that they're still having trouble building that farm team.
Okay. Andy, I also worked with your dad, Joel. You are your own man. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue this conversation in the lobby with coffee and delicious cookies. Remember, you can view and share our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU, and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please thank our sponsors, Hannah News and the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. And one more time, our panelists, Andy Chow, Alan Johnson, Laura Bischoff, and Colleen Marshall. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you at CMC again.